Hello and welcome to Live from the Farallons. We're going to wait a few minutes, and while we wait, enjoy the view of Saddle Rock out the window. It's a very windy day, so we're going to be inside. But while we wait, why don't you throw in the chat where you're tuning in from? It looks like we just came on live on Facebook, so we're just going to wait a few more minutes. And while we wait, just throw in the chat where everyone's joining from. Let's see. Well, you can test a bunch of times and still something will happen. Like my camera misbehaving. I'm sorry, bear with us while we get this figured out. There we go. Okay, well, hello, happy winter solstice, and welcome to the third episode of Live from the Farallons. I'm Garrett Duncan, the Farallon program biologist for the winter season. So Point Blue Conservation Science performs research on the Farallon Islands National Wildlife Refuge in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in order to monitor the environment, study wildlife, inform management, and provide stewardship for the island. The main focus of the winter season is northern elephant seals, but the colony is still relatively empty at this point. I think we have 3 or 4 cows as of this morning. There's a good deal of other research performed by Point Blue personnel during the winter season, though, such as monitoring wintering songbirds, shorebirds, gulls, and owls. But there's one Farallon critter that's seen in its highest numbers during the winter season. And it is the only native terrestrial vertebrate on the island and the focus of today's program, the Arboreal Salamander. So if you have any questions during the presentation, just pop them into the chat and we'll take breaks to try and answer them. Unfortunately, I cannot see. Oh, here we go. Even chat box open. Okay, cool. So the Arboreal Salamander ranges from Baja California north to Humboldt County. And as the name implies, they're usually found in forested areas. No, we saw that. This is, come on. In order to safely move through the trees, they have specially adapted toes and a prehensile tail, which they can hold onto branches or our fingers, as you can see. So does anyone have a guess how many trees we have on the Farallones? Throw your guesses into the chat and then we'll revisit the question in a moment. So the Arboreal Salamander is a member of the family Plethodontidae, which breathe exclusively through their skin. So they're restricted to areas that have adequate moisture. On the Farallones, that means they prefer the north-facing slopes of the island because this area is more damp. So let's see what people said. Looks like people are kind of all over the place, but in fact, the answer is C. There are only 3 trees on the island, and 2 of them are actual trees, and one of them is a little bit flattened by the wind. So we have 3. And interestingly, they're on the southern side of Lighthouse Hill. So the salamanders are almost never seen in them. In order to study them, we've placed 150 small cover boards on the north side of the island to provide habitat for them and make finding them much easier. They are nocturnal, so at night they roam around searching for insects to eat. But during the daytime, they retreat to crevices in the rocks and beneath these cover boards. Once every 2 weeks, we pick up each cover board and capture them just long enough to take measurements and pictures of each salamander we find. Watch a short clip of one of our volunteers discovering some salamanders under a board. Let's ask him the question. What's the minimum and maximum numbers that you think we find during these surveys? And remember, there's 150 boards. So share your answers in the chat and we'll get back to it. So we use a small ruler to measure the length of each salamander and inspect them for eggs or reproductive glands. Sometimes eggs can be seen in the abdomens of female salamanders through their semi-transparent belly skin, or a small heart-shaped bump can be seen on the chins of males. Female arboreal salamanders can lay between 12 and 24 eggs a year. So let's see how everyone did with our max and min counts. Looks like a few people got that right, so it's B. From the late spring to early fall, many surveys come up empty-handed, but during the middle of the winter, the count can exceed 50. And in February of 2015, they had a record-breaking, very busy afternoon. There were 92 found on a single survey. So let's take a quick break and just see if there are any questions in the chat. So someone had a great question. What is a coverboard? So coverboards are small pieces of wood, and they can be really any size or shape. We have to keep rocks on them in order to keep them from blowing away in the wind. But for us, they're about 12 inches by 12 inches, and they're just large enough to be able to easily lift, and they're great habitat for salamanders. So there's a question from Facebook. What is a safe way to hold salamanders? So salamanders do breathe through their skin. So we have to be extremely careful to wash our hands, make sure that there are no residues on our hands. And unless you're trained, you really shouldn't be handling salamanders, but you can safely pick them up. And as long as you're very careful with them, then they'll be just fine. Okay, let's move on. So, as you can see from this graph, the number of individuals we find is very closely related to the rain we receive. And around May, the rains stop for the year. So the salamanders retreat deep into the rocks until the rains begin around November. During the periods of dry weather, they stop utilizing the cover boards and they actually congregate deep within the rocks where it's still a little bit damp. So the photos that we take can be used to match the yellow spots and actually identify individuals. This allows researchers to correlate the measurements to each salamander to monitor their growth from year to year. So how long do you think they live? This is the average lifespan of arboreal salamanders on the Farallones. There's an interesting question here. What program do we use for individual ID? Because of the challenging lighting conditions, we can't actually use a program and it has to be done manually. So props to the people that do that. So another interesting fact, and we'll get back to the question, is that the Plethodontidae family of salamanders, including arboreal salamanders, they don't have a larval stage like other families, and the young hatch from eggs as miniature versions of adult salamanders. As you can see, they don't have big yellow spots like the adult salamanders, just a lot of fine speckling. So until they develop their yellow spots, we can't use photo ID in order to match individuals. So the correct answer to the question of how long they live is C. The Farallon arboreal salamanders live on average from 8 to 11 years. So it's really interesting that a salamander so adapted to trees found its way onto the Farallon Islands. There are theories about how this happened, but we still don't know for sure. It is possible that they were accidentally brought out by early visitors or even came from the mainland on pieces of driftwood. In 1905, they were studied by specialists and described as a unique subspecies of arboreal salamander, Anades lugubris farallonensis. Oh, too quick. So, aside from their obvious greatness, these salamanders are uniquely equipped to help the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to inform management decisions. The fact that they have porous skin means that they're very sensitive to changes in air and water quality, and they can be used as an indicator species of ecosystem health. We will continue to monitor this special population of salamanders, not only for their benefit, but for the benefit of our environment. So I would like to answer questions. Who has questions for me? We do not name all of the salamanders. There are so many. Maybe they do when they describe them and track individuals. Maybe people have favorites. And someone asked, are the salamanders listed? And they are not currently listed. They are least concern. Our population is a very restricted, it's restricted to a very small area. So they're of great interest to us and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But there is a pretty robust population of arboreal salamanders on the mainland. Their main diet items. So they eat a lot of insects and flies and all sorts of beetles and other stuff like that. I believe we have centipedes on the island, and they take care of those guys. That's a good question about just the setup on the island. If you look at the previous Live from the Farallons, we have a view from the lighthouse. We actually have a couple of houses on the island. And at the time, we have 5 people on the island. And we do research on all sorts of stuff, mainly elephant seals during the season. There's a question about, are there any predators? And I don't believe that there's actually anything on the island that specifically predates them. Gulls are very opportunistic, so I believe they might try, but I don't think that they're a common predator. What's the biggest and the smallest salamander I've seen? So the smallest that I've seen is probably less than an inch. And they're very easy to overlook. They're super, super tiny. The largest one I've seen was probably 4.5, 5 inches long and very, very large. So that's kind of the spectrum of the sizes they can be. So. There's a question if there are any albinos or other strange color morphs, and I have never seen one. I've certainly seen a lot of variation in the speckling, that sometimes they have a lot more yellow on them or they're a lot darker. And that's very, very interesting, but I haven't seen any albinism or different morphs like that. So. So one of my earliest memories, and I will treasure this forever, was my first season out here. And I had not yet done one of these salamander surveys. And so at night, a couple of the other assistants and I went around to the other side of the island, and we were searching in the rocks, and we would see them kind of crawling around through the rocks. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to find photos from that night, but it was very, very cool to see them wandering around at night. Good question. Have I ever been bit? Yes, I have been bit they don't bite very hard, but that is one of the things that they use to deter predators. And if not cleaned properly, that can cause issues. It can be infected. A question, are there any large animals on the island? There are a lot of pinnipeds, so seals and sea lions, but other than that, it's mostly seabirds and gulls and us. So they don't have any mammalian predators. And how did I get into this type of work? So I have a background in bird research, and I came out here for the first time in the fall working for Jim. He is the host of the first Live from the Farallones that you can check out. And I transitioned into the winter season, started working with elephant seals. And there's so much of the work that we do here on the island that is it's all encompassing, and we study anything that lives on the island, and that includes the arboreal salamander. And yes, the Farallonensis arboreal salamander is only found on the southeast Farallon Island, not on the middle Farallon Island, and I don't believe on the North Farallon Island. There isn't great habitat on the North Farallon Island there. So for folks that want to do island biology work, there's opportunities. If you follow the Farallones or follow the Farallones blog, you can tune in to Point Blue's social media, visit our website, and there are opportunities, job opportunities and volunteer opportunities to work on the island. And I encourage people to get into the work. It's very, very satisfying. So someone asked, is there any sign that the salamanders are losing prehensile abilities on the island? And I don't believe so. It's interesting that salamanders, they haven't been separated from the population on the mainland for long enough to show a lot of changes. There's a lot of estimates on how long it takes for a species to adapt and evolve into another species. And usually it has to do with the number of generations. But as a rough estimate, we could say 1,000,000 years, just very rough. So it has been less than that since they came out to the island. So they haven't had a chance to change more than enough to be considered their own subspecies. So, and they certainly haven't been on the island long enough to have been here while the Farallones were still attached to the Sierra Nevada mountains. And that's a whole thing on geology, but we're actually on Sierra granite right now. So that's interesting. So California newt salamander population is poisonous to predators, and it shows predators its colors as a warning. I don't believe that that's true for arboreal salamanders. I think that I'm not sure that their markings are indicative of being poisonous. They certainly are eaten by mainland predators, and their main tactics for escaping are leaping. They make kind of cute squeaking noises, although that is kind of a defense mechanism. And then they do have teeth. That is what their name Plethodonidae means, many teeth. And they will bite. And to a smaller predator, that can have big effects on them. And it's effective as a deterrent. Okay, well, if we have any more, oh, there's another question. Are there any bird watching tours that aren't disruptive and lets the public experience the island? So the National Wildlife Refuge here is actually closed to the public. There are ways that you can get very close to it. There are several outfits that run in the fall that offer whale watching tours that come to the island and circumnavigate the island, and you can get an idea of what it's like. But unfortunately, the island is a sensitive area. We want to limit as much introducing invasive species and plants and fungi. So we're very, very careful about that. And so unfortunately, it's closed to the public. All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in to another session of Live from the Farallons. Stay tuned for an episode all about elephant seals. It's coming in January. And in order to, yes, there's a link. So follow us on social media and the Farallon blog, and see our website for additional information. So on that, thank you for watching. Have a happy and healthy holidays.